Welcome to the Kelly's World Season 1 review. Foundations of the Pre-Modern World, Isolation, Empire, and Early Connections. This episode explores the world before 1450, when major civilizations developed largely in isolation. It examines how geography limited interaction, forcing societies to rely on internal systems such as governance, agriculture, and military organization. The episode then analyzes the rise of the Mongol Empire, which disrupted this isolation by connecting vast regions across Eurasia. It also considers how Mongol rule affected East Asia, particularly under the Yuan dynasty, and how the Islamic world adapted to political fragmentation while maintaining cultural unity. Finally, the episode explores developments in Europe and Africa, highlighting the growing role of trade and cultural exchange in linking previously separate regions. Episode 2: The World Before 1200: Isolation and Internal Development. Before 1200, the major civilizations of the world developed largely in isolation from one another, and this isolation played a central role in shaping how they evolved. While limited long-distance trade networks such as the Silk Road existed, they connected only a small portion of the global population. Most people lived and operated within regional systems, meaning that the success or failure of civilizations depended primarily on internal conditions rather than external interaction. Geography was one of the most important factors contributing to this isolation. Natural barriers such as mountains, deserts, and oceans limited sustained contact between regions. For example, the Sahara Desert restricted movement between North Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, while the Himalayas separated South Asia from East Asia. Similarly, the vastness of the oceans limited interaction between the Americas and Afro-Eurasia. These barriers made it difficult for ideas, technologies, and goods to spread widely, reinforcing regional independence. As a result, civilizations were largely shaped by their ability to manage internal challenges. Effective governance was essential. Rulers needed to maintain order, enforce laws, and manage resources across their territories. In many cases, this required the development of bureaucratic systems to administer large populations. The strength of these institutions often determined the stability and longevity of a state. Agriculture was another critical factor. Since most economies were agrarian, the ability to produce a stable food supply was essential for supporting population growth and urban development. Civilizations that developed reliable agricultural systems, often through irrigation or crop specialization, were better positioned to thrive. Conversely, environmental challenges such as drought or soil depletion could weaken societies and contribute to decline. Military strength also played a key role. States needed to defend themselves against both neighboring rivals and external threats, particularly from nomadic groups. Nomadic societies, while often less technologically complex, possessed high mobility and could pose significant challenges to settled civilizations. The interaction between nomadic and settled societies was a recurring feature of this period, often leading to cycles of conflict and adaptation. Despite these strengths, large empires frequently faced internal weaknesses. Communication over long distances was slow and inefficient, making it difficult to maintain centralized control. Corruption within administrative systems could undermine authority, while succession crises often led to instability or fragmentation. Overexpansion could also strain resources, making it difficult for empires to sustain their size. By around 1200, however, this pattern of relative isolation was beginning to change. Increasing trade, migration, and conquest began to link previously separate regions more consistently. These developments marked the early stages of a more interconnected world, setting the foundation for the global transformations that would follow. Episode 3: The Mongols: Conquest and Connection. The rise of the Mongol Empire in the 13th century represents one of the most significant turning points in world history. While the Mongols are often remembered for their military brutality and rapid conquests, Their empire also played a crucial role in increasing connections across Eurasia. In this sense, the Mongols were both destroyers and unifiers, contributing to the transition from a more isolated world to a more interconnected one. The Mongols originated as nomadic pastoralists from the steppes of Central Asia. These harsh environments shaped their way of life, emphasizing mobility, adaptability, and strong military skills. Under the leadership of Genghis Khan, the Mongols were able to unify previously fragmented tribes into a single disciplined force. This unification was critical, as it allowed them to coordinate large scale military campaigns across vast distances. Mongol military success was based on a combination of strategy, organization, and psychological warfare. Their armies were highly mobile, relying on horses and skilled archers to outmaneuver opponents. They also used intelligence gathering and careful planning to exploit weaknesses in enemy defenses. One of their most effective tactics was the use of terror. Cities that resisted Mongol rule were often destroyed, while those that surrendered were spared. This approach encouraged rapid submission and reduced the need for prolonged conflict. At its height, the Mongol Empire became the largest contiguous land empire in history, stretching from East Asia to Eastern Europe. This vast territory brought a wide range of peoples, cultures, and economies under a single political framework. While the empire was divided into regions, the Mongols maintained overall stability and security across their domains. This stability led to what is often referred to as the Pax Mongolica, or Mongol peace. During this period, trade routes across Eurasia became safer and more reliable. Merchants, travelers, and diplomats were able to move more freely than before, facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and technologies. Innovations such as gunpowder, papermaking, and printing spread more widely during this time, increasing connections between distant regions. The Mongols also encouraged trade by supporting merchants and protecting trade networks. They established relay stations across their empire, which improved communication and allowed for faster movement of information. This infrastructure helped integrate different regions into a broader system of exchange. However, Mongol expansion also had negative consequences. The destruction of cities and populations caused widespread suffering, and the increased movement of people contributed to the spread of disease, most notably the Black Death in the 14th century. This pandemic had devastating effects on populations across Europe and Asia. In conclusion, the Mongol Empire played a dual role in world history. While their conquests were often violent and destructive, they also created the conditions for greater connectivity across Eurasia. By stabilizing trade routes and encouraging exchange, the Mongols helped lay the groundwork for a more interconnected world. Episode 4: East Asia under Mongol rule, the Yuan dynasty. The Mongol conquest of China and the establishment of the Yuan dynasty under Kublai Khan marked a significant moment in East Asian history. It represents a unique example of foreign rule over a highly developed civilization, highlighting both the adaptability of the Mongols and the tensions that emerged from their efforts to govern a complex society. At the same time, Mongol rule in China contributed to broader patterns of regional and global connectivity. After completing the conquest of China in the late 13th century, Kublai Khan established the Yuan dynasty, becoming the first Mongol ruler to fully govern China. Unlike earlier conquerors, the Mongols did not attempt to completely dismantle existing Chinese institutions. Instead, they adopted many aspects of Chinese governance, including the use of a bureaucratic system to administer the empire. This decision reflected both practicality and necessity, as China's large population and sophisticated economy required an organized system of administration. Despite this adoption of Chinese practices, the Mongols maintained a distinct social and political hierarchy. Mongols occupied the highest positions of power, followed by other non-Chinese groups, while ethnic Chinese, particularly those from southern regions, were placed at the bottom of the hierarchy. This structure created resentment among the Chinese population, who were excluded from many positions of authority and political influence. Mongol rule also brought increased contact between China and other parts of Eurasia. Under the broader Mongol Empire, trade routes became more secure, allowing merchants and travelers to move more freely. Foreign merchants, particularly from Central Asia and the Middle East, were encouraged to participate in trade within China. This contributed to the exchange of goods, technologies, and ideas across regions. One well known example of this increased interaction is the travels of European merchants such as Marco Polo, who visited the Yuan court and documented his experiences. While some details of these accounts are debated, they reflect the broader reality of increased cross cultural contact during this period. At the same time, Mongol rule faced significant challenges. The Yuan dynasty struggled with internal resistance, economic difficulties, and natural disasters such as floods and famines. These issues weakened the legitimacy of Mongol rule and contributed to growing unrest among the population. Mongol attempts to expand further into East Asia were also unsuccessful. Efforts to invade Japan, for example, were defeated in part by environmental factors, including powerful storms. These failed invasions limited Mongol expansion and had lasting effects on regional politics, particularly in Japan, where they contributed to increased militarization and political consolidation. Ultimately, the Yuan dynasty was overthrown in the mid 14th century, leading to the restoration of native Chinese rule under the Ming dynasty. This transition reflected both the limits of foreign domination and the enduring strength of Chinese political and cultural traditions. In conclusion, Mongol rule in China demonstrates how conquest can lead to both integration and conflict. While the Mongols contributed to increased connectivity and exchange, their reliance on social hierarchy and foreign dominance created tensions that ultimately undermined their rule. Episode 5: The Islamic World, Political Fragmentation and Cultural Continuity. The Islamic world after 1200 provides an important example of how political decline does not necessarily lead to cultural or religious decline. While major political structures such as the Abbasid Caliphate weakened and fragmented, Islam continued to expand and remain a powerful unifying force across a vast region. This period highlights the distinction between political authority and cultural influence, as well as the role of trade and interaction in sustaining a civilization. At its height, the Abbasid Caliphate had been one of the most powerful empires in the world, centered in Baghdad and stretching across much of the Middle East and North Africa. However, governing such a large and diverse territory proved increasingly difficult. Over time, the caliph's direct authority weakened as regional leaders gained greater autonomy. Local rulers often maintained nominal loyalty to the caliph while exercising independent control over their territories. Several factors contributed to this political fragmentation. Distance and communication challenges made it difficult to enforce centralized authority across the empire. Economic pressures and internal conflicts further weakened the state. In addition, military reliance on non-Arab groups, including enslaved soldiers, sometimes led to instability within the ruling structure itself. A major turning point came with the Mongol invasion of the Middle East in the 13th century. In 1258, the Mongols captured and destroyed Baghdad, effectively ending the political authority of the Abbasid Caliphate. This event symbolized the collapse of centralized Islamic political power in the region. Despite this political decline, Islam as a religion and cultural system remained strong and continued to spread. Trade networks played a crucial role in this process. Muslim merchants traveled extensively across Africa, South Asia, and Southeast Asia, bringing not only goods but also religious beliefs and cultural practices. In many regions, conversion to Islam was gradual and voluntary, often linked to the economic advantages of participating in trade networks. Islam's adaptability also contributed to its continued expansion. Rather than completely replacing local traditions, Islamic practices often blended with existing cultural systems, creating regional variations. This flexibility allowed Islam to take root in diverse societies while maintaining a shared religious identity. The Islamic world also remained an important center of learning and intellectual activity. Scholars preserved and expanded knowledge in fields such as mathematics, medicine, and astronomy. This intellectual tradition contributed to the transmission of knowledge between different regions, particularly between the Islamic world and Europe. At the same time, interactions with Europe increased through both trade and conflict. The Crusades, a series of religious wars between Christian and Muslim forces, brought the two regions into direct contact. While these conflicts caused significant destruction, they also facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and goods. In conclusion, the Islamic world during this period demonstrates the resilience of cultural and religious systems. Even as political structures weakened, Islam continued to unify diverse regions and expand through trade and interaction. This distinction between political fragmentation and cultural continuity is essential for understanding the long-term influence of the Islamic world. Episode 6: Europe before 1450: Religion, Power, and Emerging Change. Before 1450, Europe was a region in transition, shaped by the interaction of religious authority, political fragmentation, and gradual economic development. While it was less centralized and in many ways less advanced than some contemporaneous civilizations in Asia and the Islamic world, Europe was developing institutional and cultural features that would later support expansion and global influence. Understanding this period is essential for explaining Europe's later transformation. One of the defining features of medieval Europe was the strong influence of the Christian Church. The Church was not only a religious institution, but also a major political and social force. It provided a shared belief system that helped unify diverse regions, even as political authority remained fragmented. The Church also played a central role in education, preserving knowledge through monasteries and shaping intellectual life. At the same time, Europe was politically decentralized. Unlike large unified empires such as those in China or the Islamic world, Europe was divided into numerous kingdoms and territories. Feudalism was the dominant political system, in which local lords exercised control over land and people in exchange for military service and loyalty. This system created a hierarchical structure, but also limited the ability of rulers to exert centralized authority. Economic activity during this period was primarily agrarian, with most people living in rural communities. However, beginning in the later Middle Ages, trade began to expand, particularly in regions such as the Mediterranean and Northern Europe. The growth of trade networks contributed to the rise of towns and cities, which became centers of commerce and craft production. This gradual economic development laid the groundwork for future change. Interactions with other regions also played an important role in shaping Europe. The Crusades, a series of religiously motivated military campaigns, brought Europeans into direct contact with the Islamic world. Although these conflicts often resulted in violence and limited territorial success, they also facilitated the exchange of ideas, technologies, and goods. Europeans were exposed to advances in science, medicine, and mathematics that had been preserved and developed in the Islamic world. In addition, external pressures influenced European development. Mongol expansion into Eastern Europe, particularly in regions such as Russia, demonstrated the vulnerability of fragmented political systems. While Western Europe was less directly affected, these events reinforced the importance of stronger political organization and military capacity. By the late medieval period, Europe was beginning to change. Monarchs gradually consolidated power, reducing the influence of feudal lords and moving towards more centralized states. Economic growth and increased trade contributed to the rise of a merchant class, which would later play a significant role in shaping political and social developments. In conclusion, Europe before 1450 was characterized by decentralization, strong religious influence, and gradual economic change. While it lacked the unity and stability of some other regions, these conditions fostered flexibility and adaptation. These developments would later contribute to Europe's ability to expand and play a dominant role in the emerging global system. Episode 7: Islam in Africa: Trade, Adaptation, and Cultural Exchange. The spread of Islam into Africa provides a clear example of how religion and culture can expand through peaceful interaction, particularly trade, rather than conquest alone. Between 1200 and 1450, Islam became an increasingly important force in North and West Africa, shaping political systems, economic networks, and cultural practices. This process highlights the role of trade routes in facilitating both economic and cultural exchange. One of the most important factors in the spread of Islam in Africa was the Trans-Saharan Trade Network. This network connected North Africa with sub-Saharan regions, allowing for the exchange of goods such as gold, salt, and textiles. Muslim merchants played a central role in this trade, and as they traveled, they brought with them not only goods, but also religious beliefs and cultural practices. Unlike many later examples of religious expansion, the spread of Islam in Africa was often gradual and voluntary. Local rulers and elites were typically the first to convert, recognizing the advantages of aligning themselves with a broader Islamic trading world. Conversion could facilitate trade relationships, improve diplomatic connections, and provide access to a wider network of economic opportunities. As Islam spread, it adapted to local conditions. Rather than completely replacing existing belief systems, Islamic practices often blended with traditional African religions. This resulted in diverse expressions of Islam across the region, reflecting both shared religious principles and local cultural traditions. This flexibility was a key factor in the religion's successful expansion.